What did you expect? That's the title of today's talk. Surprise, what did you expect? And if you're just joining us, I want to say good morning, everyone. And to those of you watching online, we welcome you to the conversation. Since the start of the school year, we've been in a great, if not challenging, family series. Now, when I just said the word family, I've seldom ever met a person that when I say the word family, it doesn't strike one of the deepest chords that are within you, for good or for not so much. And so one of the things we've been talking about, and if you have your worship guide, grab it, would you? Because under the byline, it's personal, there's a tagline, helping you to create a what? Helping you to create a what? A perfect story, right? No. Last time we talked about it's not about having a perfect marriage or a perfect family or perfect kids, because that's not even possible, but helping you create a what? A better story for your family. And so the first few weeks we talked about parenting and kids. These 2 weeks we're talking love and marriage. And today I'm going to be talking with you about something that will catch many of you off guard. Some of you will be shocked by what I'm getting ready to say. Surprise. Because in a room this size, no matter where you find yourself on your journey, no matter your religious upbringing, whether you're a long-time attender of a church or you're a brand new checking out this church, you will be somewhat surprised that a pastor is going to be sharing with you some of the things that I'm going to be talking with you about when it comes to love and marriage. I look back this week, I pulled out my old computer, and do you know that I discovered how many weddings I've officiated at, how many ceremonies I've done over my tenure as a lead pastor? I have officiated at over, you ready for this? Over 400 different weddings. Yeah, they've said I do and I will, so help me God. And so what I'm about to share with you is true for students, they need to hear it. It's true whether you're single and you're dating while waiting for mating. Whether you're a young couple freshly married, you've got a few young kids or some older kids. You're as old as Teresa and I are in our marriage or even older. These are things that we all need to understand. And it begins, and by the way, you can take some notes today on the back of your worship guide. The first note is this: somehow, at some point, some way, every marriage becomes a struggle. Not what you expected, is it? A struggle? That's the key word. It's not what you expected when you got married. You didn't intend to do it this way, but it sort of morphed into it. And this is why, here's what we've said. In a marriage, you're gonna need more than a quiver in your liver. You're gonna need more than sexual romantic attraction. You're gonna need more than just a few shared interests. Now, just so you know, I am a high expectation person. I'm a high expectation pastor. I expect a lot. I trust God a lot. But very often, is it not true that the difference between what you expect to happen and what actually does happen in your life can lead you to disappointment, discouragement, and struggle? For example, years ago now, when our girls were real young, we had this vision of one day, we dreamed of going to Disney World as a family and enjoying, Mickey Mouse and Cinderella and all the rides. So while we were living only 2 hours away from Orlando in South Florida, we sort of said, man, wouldn't it be great to get our kids there? And we looked at the brochure and the websites and all that was gonna happen. Did you know that when we got there were a lot of things that weren't on the brochure? It started when we got into the parking lot, because to get into the parking lot, $20 to park your minivan. And when you've got young kids and a growing family, you don't have a whole lot of money on the side. Then we stood in the blistering hot Central Florida sun. It was a feels-like temperature that day of about 120 degrees with 3 young girls with 200% humidity, having to listen to a song called It's a Small World After All, over and over and over. By the way, the 6th time you hear that song, you're about to go crazy. And then the ride lasts, about 33 seconds. And then you make your way to get food and drinks for the family. And then you discover you have to use an American Express card just to cover it all. All of those things and much more weren't on the brochure. And so they led us to be somewhat disappointed. I'm sorry for those of you that love Mickey and Disney and all that. And so here's the deal. This is the next line in the worship guide. Unrealistic expectations always lead to disappointment. Disappointment. And when it comes to love, and especially to marriage, at some point you will be disappointed. You will be discouraged. And it's not just the little things, although they seem important at the time. It might be the way the toilet paper rolls over the roll. Okay, you know it should go over, not under, right? Okay, you should have learned that as a child. Hello. And then you have a 10-minute argument on how you squeeze the toothpaste. You should know exactly how to do this. Did your father and mother never teach you this? But isn't it true that usually the struggle is much deeper than toilet paper or toothpaste? When it comes to communication alone, it becomes difficult. Man, woman, blue, pink. We want to be respected. You want to be loved. You need 28,000 words a day. We need at the most 7,000 words a day. Don't make us say any more than that. 2 a.m. for us is time to sleep. 2 a.m. for you is how's our relationship really going in your mind? To us, shopping is hunting. Me want shirt, me get shirt, me go home, me watch football. For you, it's a contemporary form of gathering, which is why you can go out with absolutely nothing in mind to buy and spend hours and hours looking for it. Because men and women are different. We want to be respected. You want to be loved. You want us to hear you out, and we want to fix you. Husbands, wives, lovers, friends, somehow, some way, every single marriage becomes a struggle. And as they say, the struggle is real.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me, and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's gonna stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever gonna stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
Yeah, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See,
out.
you're not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just... Sometimes it's like there's this achy... I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
Yeah, that sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. Ow. If you would just...
Don't...
Try to see things my way.
That video nailed it, right? It's not what you expected. It caught you by surprise. Guess what? Family and marriage is a barrage of surprises. And the sooner you learn that, the better. For example, you wake up after the honeymoon and you suddenly realize that life now is radically different than you were in the courtship honeymoon phase. Literally, the very person you love to play with for hours on end, now you have to live with 24 hours a day. The very reasons for your attraction can now so easily become great irritations. And so there's surprise after surprise after surprise. You say, well, year 7, year 8, we might have a child. You're 6 months into your marriage, and suddenly you have a gender reveal that you wanted to conceal for 5 or 6 more years. Surprise. Then you discover that while having children and having a kid is a lot of fun, it's also a lot of work. And you know what else it is? It's a lot of money. They did a survey on this. A married couple in America, middle income, 4-year-old child, it's estimated you will spend $233,610 to raise a child born in 2015 until they are 17 years old, and that doesn't include college. Surprise. And that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to surprises and nuances, the in-laws who act like outlaws, the job surprises and transitions, the renovation that surprise cost you twice as much as you thought it would, and it's driving you apart, teenagers in the house, and on it goes. There's this unavoidable reality of life, family, and marriage. And so many of us don't, here's the problem, we didn't expect what we should have expected. We didn't expect the expected. And I don't know any area of life where we're set up for more of a massive disappointment than the area of love and marriage. If you think about it, Hollywood sets us up for failure, right? We see all the movies where the knight in shining armor, the Prince Charming, is coming along and setting her fair maiden free, riding off on a white horse into the sunset. And by the way, we have 3 adult daughters, and 2 of them are married, the other's still single. And we have if we could have hand-selected the husband for that daughter, we couldn't have done a better job than how God did it, okay? He's the sovereign God in that way. And yet, neither John nor Chris ever came riding on a white horse on the first date to pick up our daughter. Plus, had they done so, true story, I had a Browning shotgun ready just in case. Surprise, surprise. And so it sets us up for massive failure. And even the way we view courtship and dating and mating and engagements and weddings, the cost of it alone, and the honeymoon, it sets you up for failure, disgust, and disappointment. Think about this. When you're trying to attract someone, what do? You say, I want to look my best, I want to smell my best, and I want to be on my absolute best behavior. And so what you do, you spend money foolishly and extravagantly on things you don't even have money to spend it on. Like you're in your early 20s and you're spending thousands of dollars on a diamond. Who in their early 20s needs really a diamond? What you need is a job, a job. What you really need right now is a car that runs longer than a couple of hours a week. You need one that actually works. And so you do things in courtship that you would never, ever do in real life marriage. Man, you're never gonna go to the opera again. You went once, but it's fake news. Women, you're not gonna go in the middle of a hot day and have sweat dropping off your nose to watch a ball game that you're not interested in. And so we set ourselves up for failed expectations from start to finish. Why? Because we didn't expect what we should have, parenthetically, expected. So here's what I want to do in our time that remains. I want to give you 3 reasons that I believe that love and marriage are so hard, with the hope that we can have God help us discover, admit, and come alongside of us in this conversation. Why is love and marriage so hard? The first expectation is this. Here's why. You are conducting your marriage, you are conducting your relationship in a world that is broken, in a world that is flawed. I don't have to go into details of the story. The first man and woman, Adam and Eve, had a perfect, pristine life. In the Garden of Eden, they were naked and happy. They were totally unafraid. Life was good. There was no natural disasters. There was no strife. There was no storms. There was low humidity. There were no carnivorous activity going on in the beautiful Garden of Eden. What more could you want in life? And so God says to Adam and Eve, you can eat of any tree in this whole garden that I've supplied for you, but there's one tree that you shouldn't eat of. Don't eat of that, because if you do, you're going to surely die. And guess which tree they selected to eat of? The wrong tree. And when they did, they died, eventually physically, but immediately spiritually. They died to their hopes and dreams, to relational hopes and dreams. And so why is marriage so hard? Watch this. Because we all live in a fallen world that has been broken because Adam and Eve did the one thing God said, don't do it, because if you do, it's going to get harder for you. So the thing is, we can blame Adam and Eve, but also, if you went deep down on your family tree, I don't know how many of you have gone online and done your family tree, but ultimately, you're related to Adam and Eve. And so you're a sinner by nature, but you're also a sinner by choice. And so somehow every family is touched, every marriage is touched by brokenness and fallenness on a regular basis. Now, I know some of you know that I see myself as the good news pastor, that the gospel means good news, and it doesn't feel like good news, not yet. But even in Genesis, God promised that one day a Savior would come and crush the serpent's head, that one day he would do that, and thank God one day he did. But right now, we still live in a fallen, broken world. All you have to do to discover that is look at social media or watch the TV news, and you will find out that we still live in a flawed, broken world and society. We're not fully restored yet, not yet. We will be one day, but not yet. And so Peter, this guy who's changed by Jesus, comes along and he becomes a disciple of this rabbi named Jesus of Nazareth. And Peter's life is so changed, and he admits that it's not that easy, even being a Christian, when it comes to suffering because of what Adam and Eve did. Look what he writes about in 1 Peter chapter 1. In this, you, that is, those of us who are Christ followers, should greatly rejoice. Though now for a little while, and watch these three words, while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials, these have come so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Your attention, please. Peter uses three words that I want to highlight that were underlined: grief, trials, testing. First of all, he says grief. There will be grief in this life. There will be pain in this life. Those of us who are the more mature among us, we understand pain happens in life. And God longs to use the pain, the griefs of our lives, to draw us to be dependent upon him. I've often said that pain is used by God to inspect us, to correct us, to direct us, and to perfect us. Watch this, if we allow him to do it. And that's the key. You've got to, and we'll come back to that at the end of our conversation, we've got to allow God to allow the griefs to draw you and cause you to be more fully dependent upon Jesus. Second word he uses is not only griefs, but trials. Did you know that every marriage and every family is at some point going to have a struggle or a trial? I've already said it. It's going to morph into something that you didn't want it to be. Why? Jesus said, in this world, you will have trouble and trials. He didn't say you might. For a large percentage of you, you could. He said you what? You will have trials. You will have trouble. So you need to expect it. And then the third word he uses, students, he uses the word test, testing. But the word testing there is not the word for an exam or a test. It's a word that literally means to be tempered or to be refined as precious gold by fire. This is a radical way and a fresh way for you and I to look at our marriages. Literally, I want to ask you a question today. Whether you're in a relationship or you're in a marriage or you're struggling in your marriage or your marriage you feel is dying, whatever it might be. What if what you've been going through wasn't meant to destroy you, but to develop you, to literally refine you in the process of your spiritual growth? See, BC, before Christ, we think it's all about us and we do it our way. And marriage is supposed to make me happy. And if not, I'm not happy. If I'm not having sex and enjoying sex, if things are not going peachy, creamy, hunky dory, then I'm going to bail on the marriage. But when Christ comes in, when he becomes your forgiver, your leader, your life leader, you can't live that way. Because marriage is no longer all about you. Marriage is a part of God's plan, what? Not to destroy you, but to develop you and to refine you. It's a part of your spiritual growth, if you will. And although we live in a fallen world, we're here to live and love and laugh and work. Because God, watch this, God intends even the difficult parts of your life to do things in you that can't be done any other way, which is why I often say when we're going through a struggle or pain that God wants you to grow through what you go through. So here's some questions I wrote down. What if God didn't design marriage to be so easy? What if God had in mind that something that went beyond your own happiness, your own comfort and desire to be infatuated and happy as if the world were really a perfect place? What if God designed marriage to make us more holy than more happy? And what if it was more about your character than your comfort? Watch this. What if God actually constructed your marriage to be a part of your spiritual growth journey? Again, not to destroy you, but to develop you so that you can become that man, that woman that God sees you have the potential in. First expectation. You are conducting a relationship or a marriage in a world that is clearly broken and flawed. The second perspective is this, and I'm sorry, it doesn't get much better. Not yet. It will one day. Number two, you are a sinner married to a sinner. Men, you brought something into the marriage. Ladies, you brought something into the marriage that is incredibly destructive to a relationship, and the Bible calls it sin. Romans, Paul says in chapter 3, for all have sinned. We all fall short of God's glorious standard. The truth is, husbands and wives, all the griefs and the trials and the testings that Peter talks about do not generally happen because your spouse sets out to hurt you and harm you. Please hear this. Most of the time, it's not because they are bent toward getting back at you. Now, sometimes that happens and you make it onto the Steve Wilkos or the Maury Povich or the Jerry Springer show. But for the most part, they don't really intend to harm you. They come at it rather understandably and naturally because they're broken themselves. And I've often said that we all come from a dysfunctional family. And if you don't think you came from a dysfunctional family, that's dysfunctional. We all come from a weird, whacked out family. And the reality is that, did you know this? The Bible says that your battle spouses is not your spouse in the house or your teenagers in the house or the kids growing up or not freaking you out. The battle that you've got is not really against flesh and blood. It's against something very much more insidious. It's against principalities and powers and spirits of wickedness. There's an enemy who would love nothing more than to break up your family and strain your marriage and cause you to walk away and never go back to it. It's a beautiful picture of the gospel, and Satan hates it. So he'll do anything and everything he can. Now watch this. One former pastor who became an author and a communicator, Paul Tripp, he writes about biblical marriage. Look at this definition. A biblical marriage is a flawed person married to a flawed person in a fallen world, but watch this, but with a faithful God. That's gonna be the key, with a faithful God. Now, I don't do marriage counseling, and there are multiple reasons for that. I won't take the time to explain it all. But sometimes people come back to me and say, I thought I was in love, but I think I married the wrong person. You know what happened? You didn't expect the expected. How can you take two flawed people, put them together, and have a perfect relationship? You must be in suspended animation. You must be on meth. That math doesn't work. It just doesn't. And so these unrealistic, unmet expectations will often cause your marriage to go sideways or south. Now, I recognize more clearly than ever that when I'm having a conversation like this, I understand that a lot of us are going through some of this right here, right now. And so I want to call a brief timeout, a family timeout. 2.5 years ago, when God called us to move from South Florida to Marietta, Powder Springs, we loved that God was calling us on a new faith adventure, and we tied into it and bought into it. My wife has created a really great farmhouse home for us to live in. We love it here. We love because we're close to the city and we're close to the country. We've got it both ways. We really feel like God has blessed us, and we absolutely love it here. But one thing I didn't do a whole lot when I lived in South Florida was listen to country music. These days, I listen to it more and more, and I like it more and more. And so over the years, I've compiled a top 10 list of country songs about relationships that have a story to it at some point. And I'm gonna share each of these titles. These are 10 titles. These are actual songs that were written and recorded by an artist. Here's one. I'm so miserable without you. It's like having you here. Another one. Thank God and Greyhound, she's gone. The next one. How can I miss you if you won't go away? True story. If love were oil, I'd be a quart low. Here's one. Can't get your tongue out of my mouth because I'm kissing you goodbye. How about this one? My John Deere was breaking your field while your dear John was breaking my heart. Listen to this one. She got the ring and I got the finger. Here's another song. If drinking don't kill me, her memory will. How about this one? Still miss you, baby, but my aim's getting better. And finally, she made toothpicks out of the timber of my heart. Don't you know every one of those has a story behind it? What's the new song, the new country song? Beer never broke my heart or something like that, whatever it might be. Don't you know there's a story behind every one of those songs of a relationship that went sideways? Why is that? Why is that? I'll tell you. Because of the first perspective, a broken world, and the second reality, we're all sinners. But there's a third perspective that you have to positively, absolutely get in order to see your marriage, your relationship as realistically and biblically as possible so that you can tell a better story for your family. Again, not a perfect story. If you missed last week, I talked about how Teresa and I have a perfect home, perfect kids, perfect grandkids, a perfect Weimaraner who didn't bark late into the night last night because he's perfect. And then I said, wait a minute, not so much, because no one has that. And so not only must you consider the fallenness of the world we live in and the flaws of the people you live with, your spouse in the house or your kids or whatever it might be, but there's a third and final perspective. And whether it's the two of you now or the four of you or six of you, or for some of you, 20 or 30 of you by the time you count extended family that are really close. This is the third perspective you must remember when you're going through some unrealistic expectations. Here it is. You must remember you are not alone in your struggle. Now, you feel alone. You feel isolated. You feel a loneliness. When you're going through this, you feel like you're maybe the only one who ever feels this way, but you're really not. I want you to hear today that the same God who determined the address where you currently live and knows where you work and knows what kind of a car you drive is committed to giving you everything you need in this life to make it to the next phase, the next season, so he can continue to help you grow in his grace. And the same Apostle Peter, who talked about the griefs and the trials and the testings, look what he adds. He says this in 2 Peter, his, that is God's, divine power has given us how much? He's given us how much? Everything we need for life and godliness. How? Through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. Please hear me if you will. Those of you who are currently married, especially lean in. Those of you who are confused about your marriage. Those of you who are struggling in your marriage for whatever reason, transitions, finances, kids out the wazoo, whatever it might be. You might feel like your marriage is dying or it's already dead. You might feel like it's hurting or it's hopeless or somewhere in between. This is not the way God sees your marriage. I want you to hear this today. God says this in Matthew 19, humanly speaking, it is impossible. But with God, everything is possible. Ladies, when you look at your marriage from a human standpoint, men, when you look at your marriage, the intimacy that is or isn't there, from a fleshly perspective, you said, man, there's no possible way. We've already gone too far. We've gone too long. And it's just one more nail in our coffin to be driven. But watch this. If you will begin to look at your marriage, surprise, from God's perspective, from God's standpoint, his point of view, nothing is impossible with God. They did research on the word nothing in England, and it means nothing is impossible with God. But Stan, you don't know what I've been through. You don't know how hard my marriage has been. You don't know how I've been ready to throw in the towel over and over. My give a damn's broken, Pastor. And some of you are more concerned that the pastor uses the D word in church than you are about struggling through and wrestling through and getting to the other side so you can look back one day and say, look what God did with flawed, imperfect people because I hung in there. Why? Because I expected the expected. First, you can't escape the brokenness of the fallen world. Second, you won't be able to totally go around or avoid sin and selfishness with your spouse in the house or any kids that you have. And finally, listen, I mean this. You don't have to go through this alone. You don't have to be left to your own devices. You don't have to struggle on your own. This is why we need the gospel. This is why we need Jesus. And this is why we need the encouragement of the local church. I want you to hear this today. When these doors open and you walk in here, this is something that you can belong to, which is why we call us a family. We're a spiritual family on a mission, and we get to do this together. Listen, some of you invited Christ into your life at one point in your life. My question is, are you consistently inviting Christ, watch this, into your marriage? You invited Christ into your life, but have you invited Christ into your marriage? No lie. I was on my laptop in our family room looking out toward Mud Creek, and the Cardinals were coming to the theater, and my laptop was down to 10%, went in red. And I thought, wait a minute, my laptop is plugged in. So I followed my cord all the way to the wall, and guess what? It was not what? It was not plugged in to the power source. Some of you, 20 years ago, you plugged into Jesus. 30 years ago, you said, I do and I will. Hey, I told her I loved her 30 years ago. If I change my mind, I'll let her know. Let me ask you this. Have you really and truly invited Christ into your marriage? And are you consistently inviting Christ into your marriage? Because you're going to have to keep on inviting Christ into your marriage, because you are two flawed people, and to expect two flawed people to have the perfect marriage that Hollywood says you'll have, again, you're on meth. The math doesn't work. So here's my advice. Teresa and I, after 4 decades of growing a family together, we've been through a lot of miscommunication, and no, we don't have a perfect marriage. We've been through hurricanes. We've been to the tsunami neighborhood in Thailand. We've had hurts and habits and situations we've all had to change. We've gone to counseling 6 different times in our marriage that I can remember. And we've got children and grandchildren and all that comes with that. But one thing that we have that's kept us together is, yes, we're both flawed. And yes, we both have some dysfunction. If you've ever met me, you know that. But here's what else we have. We have Christ in our lives, and we have the faithfulness of God, the steadfastness of God, who even when we don't understand one another, when I say something and it's blue and she hears pink and she wants to be loved and I just want to be respected. So here's my advice. If you're single, as you're searching for love, no one is ever going to love you like Jesus. The only perfect soulmate you'll ever find, his name is Jesus. He was an incredibly perfect rabbi from Nazareth and Galilee. And he'll revolutionize your life and your marriage if you'll let him. And if you're married, out of over 400 weddings I officiated at, several dozen people came back to me and said, Stan, Pastor, I'm ready to throw in the towel. I gave it my best. And my encouragement I gave them is, hold on just a minute, hold on. It's too soon to quit. Not now, not yet. Have you thought about giving your family, giving the stress, the anxiety, the separation, the loneliness? Have you really invited Christ, totally surrendered to God and said, Christ, I need you and I need you to show up in my relationship with my spouse. Surprise, he's the God of miracles. He can turn a dead-end marriage around in a heartbeat. And as I've thought about this, I need you to know that God longs for you. You plugged into the power source years ago, but you've been unplugging on a regular basis. You've got to consistently go back. Look what Paul says. For it is God who is at work within you, giving you, watch this, he gives you the will and the power to achieve his purpose. But I don't feel like it, Pastor. Since when do you choose feelings over faith as a follower of Jesus? Well, I don't feel like it. I don't get all the feels. Sex isn't what it used to be. Of course it's not. The kids are driving us crazy. Of course they are. We argue about money all the time. Of course you do. You're a saver and she's a spender, whatever it might be. But just maybe you needed to hear this today. Somehow, some way, all of us who are married eventually struggle. It morphs into something we didn't intend it to be. And you're gonna need something more than a quiver in your liver, sexual and romantic attraction, and shared interest. You're gonna need changed, realistic expectations. You're gonna need to lean into the hope of a faithful God. And most importantly, check this, you're gonna need grace. You're gonna need gospel grace. You're gonna need to feel God's grace in your life. Every provision and every protection is the all-sufficient grace of God. And you're gonna need to be willing to extend that grace to someone who hurt you, who harmed you, who wounded you, and maybe even betrayed you. It's an amazing thing. Maybe you're here today and you're brand new to Christianity. It's so personal that God made it personal for you and for me. And I'm glad God brought you here, and I believe that he did. Maybe you're here today and you have a perfect marriage. We don't really want to talk to you. You can just leave and go somewhere to eat afterwards. But for those of us who are realistic, man, we got to wrestle with this. It's an authentic vulnerability. Maybe you're here today and you love yourself more than your spouse. Congratulations. To admit that alone means your marriage finally has hope. I can't keep doing this because I love myself more than I love my spouse. And that you would die to that fleshly thing. See, the story of Christianity is the story of a perfect God who loved us so much. He made it so personal that he tapped the shoulder of his one and only begotten Son to live a perfect life you could never live. To take all of your sin and shame and guilt and your dysfunction and your weirdness and your whacked outness and all of God's wrath against that. And Jesus says, I love you so much, I'm gonna forgive you for all that. And I'm gonna bleed out for that. And I'm gonna die for that. And it'll be done. And he did, and he died. And 3 days later, he came back to life to give you life in this life, not a perfect life. That's heaven one day. Some of you think that your marriage ought to be a little more perfect. You are not there yet. And the difference between the already and the not yet can create so much disgust and disappointment and unrealistic expectations, which is why I'm saying, understand the fallenness of humanity and the brokenness of our world. And God doesn't want you to do this alone. I really wanted to close this talk right here, right now, but the Lord wouldn't let me. I came across a story and I wrestled with it. I said, God, I really don't want to share that. He said, you're going to. So this morning I gave the creative team a chance to bail on the story. They didn't let me. So here it is. I want you to imagine, this is an imaginary couple. I want you to imagine this happening. A couple gets married, and they decide to make Jesus Christ the number one priority of their lives. Their marriage, their family, their kids, their business. And they stick to it through all the ups and the downs, the good and the bad, the highs and the lows. Now, fast forward the story, 55 years later. They've been married, and all along they've walked with this unique understanding that two flawed people in a fallen world were able to follow a faithful God. The key was the faithfulness of God for them and for their marriage, the steadfast faithfulness of the Father. But now the time has come when the unthinkable is happening, when the aging process has caught up with them and one partner will drop the other off or check the other one in at a hospital and the other partner will drive away. Kind of knowing deep down in the pit of their stomach that person isn't ever gonna really come home. That the grim reality will be that they have slept together for the last time in their bed and the end is near. That person will go home and sit in the family room and be filled with memories and remember the first date, first kiss, the wedding, the honeymoon, the first apartment, the first home, that first baby, the first graduation, the first tuition bill. He or she will remember their 25th wedding anniversary and the first grandchild, maybe the retirement party, and certainly their last anniversary they had together. Then that one partner will realize, maybe more fully than ever, how blessed he or she was to have a partner for life, to have a lifelong partner who did the whole race together, just like God had envisioned it for them, just like the Holy Spirit had been rooting them on all along, one run from the start to the finish line, all the way to the end, and they were able to do it together because of the faithfulness of God. I think that's God's desire for most of us when it comes to marriages. And I hope and pray that you'll surrender your life to Christ today or re-invite Christ into your marriage, if for no other reason than that. All over this room, could we bow our heads for prayer? I want to pray with you and for you. Our Father in heaven, thank you for a reminder today that you've invited us into a love relationship that you've made personal, but that you have placed us in a broken, fallen world full of people who are flawed. And God, we cannot do this without you. Jesus, we need you. Thank you for these fresh reminders that we can place our hope in you, but we have to begin to live with realistic expectations this side of heaven. And by grace, we thank you for our griefs and our trials and our testings, because they're happening not to destroy us, but to develop us, to refine us, to become the men and women, the husbands and wives that are glorious pictures of the gospel, the bad news, good news. As we continue to pray, if you're here today and you've never surrendered your life to Christ, why not now? Today's your day. Just between you and God right now, say, God, thank you. Thank you for loving me so personally by sending your own son, Jesus, to die on a cross to forgive me for all my sins. Jesus Christ, tell him that. Jesus Christ, as an act of faith, I turn to you right here, right now. And I trust in you, Jesus. I invite you to come into my life and change me from the inside out. Thank you for forgiving me. Thank you for giving me hope. Thank you for giving me heaven one day. And from this moment on, Jesus, help me keep trusting you, depending upon you all the days of my life, because you are faithful even when I'm not. Thank you, Jesus, for answering my prayer and changing my life now and to all of eternity. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.